Good afternoon, and welcome to the Board of Health meeting of October 18th, 2021. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and will be available shortly hereafter for scheduled and on-demand viewing on any smartphone or tablet device. If anyone else is recording the meeting, please notify the chairman. Pursuant to Governor Baker's June 16th, 2021 signing of an act relative to extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency, including the extension of his March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 20, until April 1st, 2022, this meeting of the Chatham Board of Health is being conducted in person and via remote for public participation. Every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceeding as provided in the order. A reminder that persons who would like to listen to this meeting remotely while in progress may do so by calling the phone number 508-945-4410, and the conference ID is 292-542-489#, or join the meeting online via Microsoft Teams through the link in the posted agenda. While this is a live broadcast and simulcast on Channel 18, despite our best efforts, we may not be able to provide for real-time access. We will post a record of this meeting on the town's website as soon as possible. Now I'd like to turn the meeting over to Chairman Beckley.
Thank you very much, Judy. Tonight we have...
Good.
Thank you very much, Judy. Tonight we have no hearings, but we have 3 agenda items. Let's start with the first one, which is a discussion and an update regarding John McGrath's property on 32 Mill Hill Road. Dr. Duncanson.
Good evening. Good evening. In terms of an update on 32 Mill Hill Road, to the best of our knowledge, and I think Judy was going to go out there today, there has been little to no movement on the part of Mr. McGrath in terms of moving any material, specifically that which sits in the road layout. After some effort, we have received...
We didn't hear it.
Okay. After some effort, we have received a proposal from a surveyor to conduct a survey of the sideline of the road, as well as the property lines in the area. This has been something we've been trying to get for a couple of weeks now. There was some reluctance on the part of several surveyors to undertake this work for a variety of reasons, but we have now gotten a proposal. I spoke to the town manager about it earlier this afternoon. We also reviewed what survey work the town was already collecting because of the sewer project along that road. However, that's not going to be of sufficient accuracy that we need here for this property, given the fact that it may or may not, at some point, result in some court action. So we're going to go ahead and get that engineer engaged, or that surveyor engaged, and get that done as quickly as possible. I do have a call into the company to find out exactly what kind of time frame they're looking at to get it done. But when I did talk to them initially, it would probably be over, a couple of weeks. So hopefully, before the end of November, we would have the property surveyed, staked. It will be GPSed because obviously there is some concern about how long the stakes may survive. And so we will take care of that as best we can to make sure that everything is documented through photos and GPS. So if we have to go out and reestablish any of those stakes, it will be done. And so that's where we're kind of at for the next major step in this process of getting this moving. Once we have the property lines surveyed, we will then make a determination as to what material is in the road layout, and the board can simply order Mr. McGrath to remove all that material immediately, and then decide to what extent you want to go further in terms of on the property itself. We do have a couple of questions pending with town council regarding how to access Mr. McGrath's property and when and where. and whatnot. And so hopefully we'll have some answers to those, either for your next public meeting or potentially a further meeting in executive session with town council as we move this forward. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Board members, I had contacted Judy with some questions I had relating to the legality, certain legal aspects of our process, and I sent them to Judy.
And they have been forwarded over to town council for his input. And that's why I said he'll either get back to us in public session or in further executive session to address some of those questions.
And he'll decide how best to
Yep.
reflect back. So I would say if any board members have thoughts about upcoming challenges in terms of moving ahead with this investigation and this process, put them in writing to Judy, and she will forward them to the town council and to Bob, so they can be added to my questions. I guess we could share my questions as well, confidentially. But I'm just not sure whether these questions should be discussed publicly or in a closed session, and I defer to the council to advise us which way to go on that. Yes.
And can I just ask, this has been going on for more than 5 years, it's my understanding is. And are we any further along in this process now than we were 5 years ago? It sounds like the only thing that's new is putting stakes to outline the property. But he's been ordered to remove things on several occasions, got certified letters, and he's ignored them. So we're really basically where we've been for the last 5 years. So we need to push on.
Yeah, my perspective is that although the issue remains and the challenge remains, I believe our direction and our focus has been clarified and authorized. So I think we have a green light to proceed with this from the town leaders, and it's a matter of us moving ahead each step of the way so that whatever we do is proper and documented and effective at the end. Yes, Ron?
I'd like to ask Bob a question. Has he made any attempt to move anything at all?
There's been some stuff that's been put into a number of trailers on the property, but now we have the trailers that are in the road layout and whatnot. So he hasn't done a whole lot that we've been able to document, no.
Thank you.
So for the survey, the legal aspect of access, has that been worked out? Does the surveyor, do you know that he could, when the survey is scheduled, that he can go on the property and survey it?
Well, in terms of the survey that the surveyor will be doing, he won't need to go on the property, he'll be doing it from the road layout. So we could do that anytime.
But he'll put stakes in on the property?
Well, the
corners?
stakes will be right on the property line, but they'll be putting them in from basically the town side of the property line.
Is he gonna go all the way back to the back end of the property as well?
No, this is just the road layout,
Just the
road layout,
The-
right.
the easement from the town, of the town property
Well,
off the
Mill
road?
Hill is a town road.
Yeah.
So there is a layout from one side of the road to the other side of the road, and that's what he will be staking. So on the 32 Mill Hill side, the road layout is the same as the property line, basically.
Right.
So he will not be doing the two sidelines
Well, that was
all
going
the
to be,
way back, except he will be doing the sidelines where they intersect the road layout. So we'll know exactly how wide the property is, but he will not be surveying from the road layout to the back of the property, if you will.
do we know what direction the lines will be
Yeah,
going?
we have the general information in the town's GIS, yes,
Okay.
yes.
So my understanding is that we haven't decided yet the extent of removal of the trash on the property.
Correct.
Which could go as far as all the trash on the whole property.
You could do
Obviously,
the
just
entire property.
The easement, what I call the easement from the road, we know that has to go. So at some point, there'll be an inspection, we'll have to, and look at what's back there and make some kind of a
Right.
determination. So I'm just wondering, like, John, do we have enough information without the sidelines? Where's the back corners?
We'll have to have a general sense of whether the sidelines go straight back or are angled so that we can evaluate
Yeah,
that.
and we have that information. Yeah, we
Will,
don't have it.
Bob, are there plans? I mean, at some point, there's going to have to be other stakes put down and ribbons, I would think, strung, characterizing the scope
The
of.
entire property, yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
So that when a potential bidder comes to the site, he or she will have to be able to understand clearly the scope of what the cleanup would need to be so that they can come up with an estimate to submit. So there's more work to be done there than simply.
Yeah, sounds like it. And then I had another question. It's been declared a fire hazard. Is there a separate process that the fire department has to go through to say what they need to take care of that problem? Is that it?
Yes.
And that's coordinated with what we're doing?
Yep.
Yeah. And the last thing, the cost of removal,
Yep.
which we don't know what it is, it could be high if it's a lot and it goes way back, is that cost already something that we know we can get covered? Or do we have to go and there's a whole separate process of getting the money from the town for that? Or is there a fund where it's immediately available so we can move ahead and get this done?
The short answer to the question is there is no pot of money currently available. That funding would be sought at next year's town meeting.
So the trash removal could not possibly occur before next May?
Technically, it probably could not occur before July 1st of next year.
For
to the
July
start of the
1st.
new fiscal year.
And so there's a timeline to get a warrant article
Yep.
that would have to be placed on that?
Yep. Earlier on, there was some discussion about placing an article in the special town meeting if one were to take place this fall. And as you know, there is a special town meeting next Saturday. But the decision was made to keep that special town meeting strictly limited to the PFAS issue in the drinking water wells. And so the selectmen didn't include any other articles. And so no article was drafted up for that because we were told it wasn't going to take place until the annual in the spring.
So before the article is put together, we'd have to know the extent of trash removal and an estimated cost?
Yep.
And then put that together, and that would have to be done whenever the warrant articles are due for the May meeting. So there's a time
Which is
schedule
generally
there.
December, January.
December, January.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Okay?
All right, but I would say that to Dick, I mean, we've been dealing with the legal issue, Bob has been, and so we're moving ahead. But I think the board has made a commitment to, as quickly as we can, but there's a lot of things to do, to get this finally cleaned up for the town and for
Right.
Mr. McGrath and for our board. So, I mean, I think we're committed to do that.
So I think there are two things that we need to be made clear. One is that the extent of the nuisance isn't just related to the trash that's on town property, and that he is going to have to clean up enough of that material so that he no longer degrades the value of other people's properties. And it also needs to be made clear to him that if the town has to wait until next July or August to get money for the town to go in and clean it up, it's going to cost a lot more money than if he decides to go ahead and do it himself sooner, because a town contract to clear that up is going to extend to a very, very large amount of money, and he's going to have to pay it, or there'll be a lien on his property, and his property could be sold. So he just needs to understand that. We need to make that perfectly clear. It's not in his advantage to wait until next August
Right.
and have the town hire a contractor to come in and spend $75,000 to clean that up. If he can get some of his buddies to go in and do it, for a very small amount of money. And that needs to be very clear.
And that's just a number you made up.
Yeah, I made.
You have no basis.
No, but I'm sure it's going to be a lot of money.
But then he would need to know the extent of the cleanup that we think needs to be done beforehand
Right.
and
So we need
communicate it to him. So that's the.
We need to
timeline.
lay that out.
But I think,
Because he seems to think that the big problem is what's on the road, and he did comment, maybe I should put up a fence, or something like that. But, just clearing up the trash that's on town property is not going to suffice.
right,
Okay,
all right,
all right.
yes. Certainly. Would anybody from the public like to comment on this issue before we go ahead with the agenda? Please come up. Yeah, which mic is on? Podium mic,
It's usually the first one.
first one.
If it's not green, just push the red button.
It's already green, so, we're good?
Yep, please give us your name first.
My name is Victoria Chase, and I live on Mill Hill Road. I am not a direct abutter to Mr. McGrath, but I do have one driveway on one of my properties right across the street from his pile. And we've been there for quite a long time. And up until very recently, I've always tried to maintain a somewhat cordial relationship with him for obvious reasons.
Move the mic in front of your face, please.
Can you hear me now?
That's a little better, thank you.
Okay. So up until recently, I've tried to, keep a cordial relationship with him. It just isn't, possible. So his pile has obviously increased considerably since before COVID. And he has always said, if you need me to do anything, if you blah, 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 just give me a call. I'll move a trailer, I'll do whatever. So I called him. I've called him 3 or 4 times. I got boxed in next to his trailer in his junk pile when a big 10-wheeler was coming by. Because you have to understand, if you don't live on the road and you don't drive back and forth, you don't understand what a hazard it is for traffic. It is literally a 1-lane road now. And when you have big trucks coming, somebody has to pull over. The road is narrow anyway. I mean, historically, it's always been that way, but there's no shoulder space. So when you have to pull over, there's no place to go. So if somebody was coming at you, didn't see you, sun glare, whatever, you can't pull over to the shoulder to get out of the way. You're literally trapped there. So, I call him, hi, could you just, today was kind of scary, could you just move that trailer? Oh, yeah, sure. So he moves it, 24 hours later, back exactly in the same spot. So this is what happens day in and day out. And I'm happy to hear that you guys are going to move forward with some things, but I was super disappointed that it was taken off for the special town meeting. Because July 1st, we've been waiting forever. It's been over 12 years. When I first started going down the road, it was a couple of boat forms and a log pile, probably the same one that's there. It wasn't anything that was that offensive, but this is clearly, it's out of control. And he piles the stuff on the trailers and he moves the trailers, and then he brings them back. So he moves them to another spot. It's the same material, trash and all that. It just goes to a different spot, and then it comes back. And a lot of people on there, I should have more neighbors here. I'm the only one here. I posted a video on Facebook. I sent it to Dr. Duncanson. Somebody had to say something, because I just feel like it's a non-issue because it's not downtown. And I love our little neighborhood. We have great neighbors. There's a couple farmers on the road. There's people just, it's a nice working class neighborhood. And he just is just an oppressive presence on the street. People are afraid to say something. Somebody had to.
Well, thank you. Thank you for taking the time to come tonight and to share with us your feelings and your concerns. It's helpful for us to hear from.
And I appreciate that. And I think that, we have a police department, and they do a great job. If he's going to be aggressive or bullyish or whatever when the surveyors are there, then the police need to be there. He gets away with it, I guess, because people just want to smooth it over. I know I did for years. I did it for years. He would show up in my driveway, somebody turned me in, it must have been you, blah, blah, blah. People don't know how to handle that.
Yeah.
So I think that's an important part of this. I think that's a very important part of why this has gone on for so long. People are afraid to speak up.
Most people avoid conflict, let's
Yes.
face it.
So I am glad to hear you guys talking about it the way that you are right now. I am very disappointed. that we don't get to vote on, at least a partial amount of money or something that we could put aside to just help clean this up, just do something. Because, I mean, there's a lot of those refrigerators, there's a lot of, stuff there that he lives on a pond. It's a beautiful pond. I think it's 2.5 acres there. And it's on a steep slope. There's refrigerators, freezers, stoves. I mean, you name it, he's got it there. So, thank you, sorry, I keep talking. but-
Any questions or comments?
Yeah,
Ms. Chase?
Yeah, well, the timeline of this for the board, I think, is kind of emerging to some extent. But my question would be, is there some sort of emergency funding if the police declared that this road is a hazard because of this material? There obviously has to be a way of dealing with that as an emergency, separate funds, just to clean up the roadway for safety. Is there a way to pursue that as an emergency that might get something done quicker?
Well, just for clarity's sake, in terms of any material that's in the road layout,
The road layout means including the easement,
well, any place where he's over the property line onto the public road layout.
the roadway
Okay.
itself.
I'm not sure where that funding would come from, but that can be addressed in the short term. And it may be as simple as DPW going down and removing the material out of the road layout. When I talked about having to go to town meeting for further funding, that was to remove material that's on his property itself,
Okay.
okay? I just wanted to make that
Okay.
clarification, because I think it may have gotten a little bit lost, because there's two things. There's material that's in the road layout and material that's on his property itself. On his property itself, we have to go get the funding for, and that's where his property would then be leaned for whatever that cost is. The road layout itself, I dare say, we would more than likely try to handle that in-house with existing town funds from DPW or the transfer station or wherever. That's my expectation. There is no, pot of money sitting there for those kinds of scenarios, if you will. But we can deal with that in-house.
But
Right,
there's
so
there's a possibility of a two-step process here.
Yes.
The first being less money may be more readily available to an emergency funding source, and the second part being a bigger pot of money required that would have to be more formally appropriated.
Yeah, I think the emergency scenario, the road layout scenario, that would be done within existing budgets within
Right.
DPW or health or
Okay.
wherever we feel we can get enough money. If we do it with our own resources, with DPW staff and whatever, or transfer station staff and heavy equipment, shouldn't be a big cost to it.
Okay.
A lot of that material is recyclable, so it would go more than likely to the transfer station into the metal pile or whatever to be recycled. So it's not like we're taking trash per se that's just getting it into a dumpster and then going to CMAS to be burned, so.
Bob, when you say roadway, there's the actual asphalt, and then there's that
There's
10
the
or 15
actual,
feet that the town has access to, that's on your property for whatever.
Well-
Is that included in the roadway, or just?
when we talk about the road layout,
Yeah.
that basically goes from one property line on one side to the other property line of abutting private properties. Within there, you have the paved surface. Now,
Right.
in
Forget about
general,
easement.
Okay.
in general, the paved surface is down the middle of a road layout. Not always, sometimes it can be on one side or the other. But that area between those two property lines on either side is public property.
How wide is
Whether or not it's
that?
absolutely all paved or not is somewhat irrelevant.
How wide generally is that roadway?
Road layouts can vary. They can be 20 feet wide, 30 feet wide, 40 feet wide. I think this one, don't correct me,
So it's the pavement
Um,
plus.
this one is a 50-foot wide right-of-way.
Okay.
So within there, you may have a 20-foot paved surface.
And 15 feet,
And
right.
then, yeah, it may not be 15 because the paved surface may or may not be in the middle.
Right.
But it's a 50-foot wide right-of-way, and that's what we're getting staked. So we know exactly where the town public property is versus everything else that's on his private lot.
So this expedited removal of the
Material.
road, I mean, that would be what's overlaps the asphalt, but would go back after the survey in a couple of weeks perhaps, another 10 or 15 feet, and all that could be removed
All that
by the
could be
town.
removed.
By the
Once we
town,
know
DPW
exactly-
quickly.
Right.
And then the rest of the property would be maybe after. That's a big difference, I think, for an abutter to know that.
Right.
That
I
timeframe.
think.
That's
I-
huge, actually, and thank you. I just put in a 3-rail fence, and for example, I went and I measured my neighbor's fence across the street, the paved to his fence, and then my other neighbor on the other side, and I just set my fence. Everybody seems to be about 6 feet off the road. I don't know if that's correct or not. It's an old road, right? It's been there for a really long time. So just having the shoulder open would make a tremendous difference.
I think I can speak for the board to say that we would all really welcome
Yep.
progress, even if it's just this Plan A we're hearing discussed now. It would at least show that progress is being made and that at least one concern about passage would be alleviated.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it, and thanks for letting me speak.
You're welcome. Anybody else wish to comment on this issue? Yes?
Hi, I'm Carol Gordon from South Chatham, and I want to, my glasses are going to fog up because of the mask, but anyway, I want to commend the board for their action and their empathy for the residents of Mill Hill Road that have been, in a sense, held hostage by John McGrath for over 10 years. And so I'm sure many of us really appreciate your efforts and what we're hearing tonight. Also, we were told the possible cleanup in November, and now it seems like it may be a little later, but maybe not because of the new emergency fund that you brought up. And I think that would be amazing that we could do that and get the road cleaned up as quickly as possible. If people are reluctant to come on and do the work, as Victoria stated, we have a police force that can be there and be there for assistance to make them feel comfortable. I was wondering if it might be possible tonight to maybe to have a motion and take a vote to use the emergency fund money to clean up the road part, because that is public, it's a public road, and I think that's the duty of the town to keep the public roads clear. And I was wondering if maybe that could be put forward so that we could start working on that immediately, letting the people, the residents of Mill Hill know that the town is on their side and that we want to clean things up. And I think it would be such a positive step in the right direction. And then if we need to go and get more funds in May, okay. But right now, if people know that they have to wait till May or July of next year, unfortunately, that's just not acceptable from this town. I know we can do better. And so I'm thinking if you might entertain something like that and at least get the ball rolling, get it cleaned up with the resources that we have from the transfer station. That was a wonderful idea. And the fact that some things may be recyclable, that would be really a step in the right direction for everyone, people of Chatham and the town. So anyway, I hope you entertain that, and I hope you're the board that helps make a big difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gordon. I don't know, Bob, I don't know what's within the reasonable scope for us tonight to do or not do.
Well,
What would you
just to make sure we're all on the same page, there is no emergency fund sitting around.
Correct.
All right, what I was saying was, it's my expectation that we can clean up the area within the road layout, in the public right-of-way, within existing budgets and with existing town resources. There is no, separate pot of money sitting anywhere to do that.
Right.
It would be a question of, some DPW staff manpower, potentially DPW equipment. They do have some heavy equipment if necessary. But that's the way we do it. Utilizing existing resources within existing FY22 budgets. Because some of it can probably go to the transfer station, other material, we just have to see where most appropriate would be to take it. More than likely, most of it is going to end up in the transfer station. But By that, it could end up in the white pile for recycling appliances. Other material, could end up in the metal pile to be recycled. So it would be divvied up just like anybody bringing their normal material into the transfer station would be. Except in this case, theoretically, it's a much larger volume. Unless Mr. McGrath, once we get it all staked out, takes and moves everything out of the road layout onto his private property, which conceivably he could do. And then it would fall more under, okay, now the Board of Health is going to go in and inspect his property and order whatever level of cleanup you feel is appropriate at that point in time. So I expect that, hopefully all that takes place over the next couple of months so that then we could pull together an article for town meeting to fund that aspect of it. Obviously, it'd be a lot easier to see his entire property in the wintertime without the leaves on the trees and other vegetation and all, to get a much better sense of exactly what you feel
Good point.
the level of cleanup needs to be.
Is there a sentiment on the board for a motion of some type?
I'd like to ask Bob a question.
Go ahead.
Bob, what about the slush fund? You always hear it at town meetings, you hear slush fund, the slush fund. I always hear it, but I have no idea how you get to it or who gets to it.
There is no slush fund that I'm aware of.
They mention it all the time.
Well, what they talk about is free cash, okay? And that is funds that's left over at the end of each fiscal year, all right? Which for whatever, so in other words, I put together various budgets every year, okay? And I say at the end, for next fiscal year, I'm going to need $100. Well, at the end of that fiscal year, if I only spent 95 out of that, and obviously the numbers are much bigger, but for example, if I've only spent 95, the $5 remaining between what was budgeted and what I actually spent, we could go to the state, the town can go to the state and certify that $5 as free cash, which then could be used in the next budget cycle. And generally in Chatham, that money, that free cash, is used for capital budget items.
Okay.
Buying new trucks, roofs on buildings, and things like that. So that's what's potentially available. But that money, at the end of each fiscal year, you have to go to the state, and the state certifies how much free cash a municipality has. So there isn't a slush fund that's sitting out there that, we could just go to at any point in time to use. The only fund that is available like that is the town manager's office has a consulting and engineering budget, which is generally $100,000. And that is kind of an emergency fund that if something comes up during the year, there is a pot of money that could be tapped into. All right. Now, whether or not something like this could fall into that, potentially, depending on the amount, if it takes away the entire amount, they may not want to use it for that, as opposed to having to go to town meeting to ask for a special appropriation. That budget is used, that budget is more akin to the next thing that we're going to talk about, which is PFAS. All our wells suddenly crapped out because of PFAS and the town needs to do something tomorrow to fix it. That money potentially could be used for something like that. Where it's a dire emergency that's, got to be addressed quickly.
I guess the question now then is who gives the order to the town maintenance people to clean this up? I assume it's the town manager would be responsible. So would it be appropriate for us to send a request to the town manager that once the property is staked and we know where the town property extends, that she immediately ask the Public Works Department to remove that trash?
I think that's perfectly appropriate for you to urge the
So
town
why don't we do
manager to
that?
take any steps necessary to make
a
that
motion?
happen.
I'm not a member.
Kenny. As an alternate. I know they can't vote. Can he make a motion as an alternate?
Somebody else can make the motion.
Yeah, I can make, I can make
Okay.
a motion that we make a recommendation or a request, what's the best word, that once the survey is completed and we know the extent of the roadway, that the town use its own resources, the DPW, to go ahead and do that cleanup as quickly as possible after the survey,
I think that's
and
appropriate.
make that request to the town so it's
And do we give, taking up another comment we make, do we at the same time advise Mr. McGrath of what's going to happen and approximately when?
Well, we will keep Mr. McGrath apprised of anything.
Okay.
Because as you know from the discussions that you had with town council previously about this, there are a series of steps that we have to go through.
Okay.
We will be keeping him apprised.
Ron, do we want,
I'll second.
we have a second, we have a motion. Ron, you want to comment on the motion, or is this something else? Okay, second. Okay, we've had a discussion. Does anybody from the public want to comment on this motion before we vote? Yes, sir.
John Holgren, South Chatham, and I only go up on that road maybe 2 or 3 times a year when I go to the stump dump, but that situation there has got to be probably the worst situation in Chatham that I'm aware of in terms of how that sits. So the quicker you can do something to fix that problem, I think the better. I grew up in rural Central Florida in a little redneck town, and which is known for having junk all around. Nothing like that. So if this guy can beat redneck Central Florida in the 60s, it's obviously a problem. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a motion, we have a second. Any further Board of Health discussion, or are we ready for the vote? I think we'll cover it all. Okay, all in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion has carried. So, all right, I feel good about this. It's a good thing. Okay, let's move the agenda to the next item, which is a discussion update regarding Chatham water quality. Dr. Duncanson.
Okay, so, as I mentioned, we have a special town meeting coming up on Saturday at 9:30 at Veterans Field. There are 3 articles on the special town meeting warrant. The first one is just for prior fiscal year bills. The second article is water capital for wells 10 and 11. And we've talked about that before. Wells 10 and 11 are 2 wells that are in the northwest corner of Chatham. And I won't go into all the detail, it's in the explanation, but those were 2 wells that were identified back in the early 2000s as part of a townwide survey looking at additional well locations, potentially in Chatham. The well casings were put in, the screens were put in, the plans for the well pump houses were developed, but they were never finished because some MTBE was detected. And if you remember back, MTBE was a gasoline additive for many, many years and created all kinds of water quality issues nationwide. It's since they've stopped using it, and it is, unlike PFAS, MTBE can naturally degrade over time. So that's been the one good thing, is that has taken place in the intervening years, as well as groundwater movement has drawn any remaining MTBE away from the well sites. So this is a topic, wells 10 and 11 has been talked about numerous times over the years. It took on added urgency with detection of PFAS. So this article seeks $4.5 million to go ahead and complete wells 10 and 11 to the point that they can be brought online and utilized. So not only would it help with the PFAS issue, but it would also provide additional capacity just in terms of dry years, in Chatham, and not taxing all our existing wells too greatly. So that's Article 2 on the special town meeting. Then we have Article 3, which is more directly related to PFAS. because as you're aware, wells 5 and 8, well 5 has been offline since April. Well 8 was taken offline in September. Both of those are in what we call the training field well site. So they are off training field road. Both of those wells were being looked at previously for iron and manganese removal. Iron and manganese is a naturally occurring compound in the bedrock that underlies our feet. Even though the Cape is a sandbar, there is bedrock underneath that. Iron and manganese typically leaches out of bedrock over time, and then as you pump the water, you gradually pull up that iron and manganese to the point that it becomes problematic. It's dissolved in the water, but in circumstances, when it gets into things like hot water heaters and whatnot, it can precipitate out, and that's what gives you either orange or black water. So we were designing a treatment facility for iron and manganese removal, which is very similar to the treatment facility that was constructed several years ago in the town forest to serve wells 6, 7, and 9. That was designed specifically for iron and manganese removal. And then last spring along comes PFAS. PFAS, as we've talked about, is known as a forever chemical. It's very prevalent in our, industrial age, if you will. It's in everything from microwave popcorn containers to cell phones to nonstick cookware to stain-resistant carpeting and clothes. And then the other source that gets most of the notoriety is firefighting foam. So we currently do not know specifically where the PFAS that's been detected comes from, as I've talked about previously. It's been detected at extremely low concentrations in the parts per trillion. There is no federal safe drinking water standard for PFAS yet. Massachusetts put in a state safe drinking water regulation last October, and that set a limit of 20 parts per trillion in drinking water in Massachusetts. It also set a timeline for detection, for testing all the various water systems in the state. We did that testing back in April, detected PFAS in wells 5 and 8, and they have been taken offline. So this article is basically to do two things. One is to build a permanent water treatment plant for wells 5 and 8 to remove the iron and manganese, as well as adding on treatment to remove the PFAS, so that those wells can be brought back online in the future and not have any issues. This article also contains funding to, on an emergency basis, if you will, and again, timing of emergency is not always the greatest, but on an emergency basis, bring in granular activated carbon vessels, so big metal tanks containing granular activated carbon, which is the same thing if you have a vent over your stove and you remove odors, that's how you're removing it, is granular activated carbon. But to bring those treatment vessels in as soon as possible, and right now we're looking at a 5-month lead time from the manufacturer to get those vessels, just because of their size as well as COVID-19, a whole supply chain issue, if you will. But to get those online here as quickly as possible, hopefully by April of next year, while the design of the larger, more permanent treatment plant continues. Design, permitting, and construction of the permanent water treatment plant is probably a 3-year process. But our hope is to get the granular activated carbon vessels online within 6 or 7 months. And then basically we would then build the rest of the treatment plant around those vessels. So ultimately those vessels would be part of the permanent treatment plant. And so that's the current plan, and so the article contains about $650,000 in funding for those permanent treatment vessels, for those temporary treatment vessels, if you will. And then the remainder of the funding from $650,000 up to $1.4 million is to do the design of the permanent treatment facility. And we're also obviously going to seek all the funding, outside funding sources we can for that, including the state has a grant program for PFAS up to $150,000. So obviously we're going to go after that $150,000. for the emergency granular GAC vessels, so hopefully reduce the cost of them down even further. So those are the two articles that will be on Saturday's town meeting. And then the other component of the PFAS issue is the assessment study to try and determine the source of the PFAS. We have received a number of proposals from consultants to do that. Unfortunately, right now, they're apples and oranges. We had 3 proposals. One company, Weston and Sampson, withdrew their proposal because, as you probably know, they are the town's consultant on the water system as well as PFAS, and they just didn't feel it was appropriate for them also to be potentially doing the assessment, so they've withdrawn. So we have 2 other proposals that unfortunately are apples and oranges. We're working right now to scope out a uniform scope that will be shared with one of the consultants so that we have apples to apples comparison. Hopefully that takes place over the, say, the next week to 10 days. And then we will get a consultant engaged to do the study of potentially where the PFAS may have originated from and whether or not there's any opportunity to treat a specific location to try to reduce the level of PFAS. I will tell you though, given that we are dealing with extremely low levels, and we're down less, the state's MCL, or maximum contaminant level, is 20. The federal health advisory is 70. The levels that we're seeing are, we had a couple of hits that were above 20, but ever since recently, and we're sampling about every 2 weeks, we've seen levels that have been below 20. So we're dealing with extremely low levels. So whether or not the consultant would be able to pinpoint a location and say this was where it originates from remains to be seen. One of the consultants has already advised us, and they basically developed a technique that's been used all over the country to kind of fingerprint it and then, trace it back to a source. They've already cautioned us that given our extremely low levels, they may not be able to do that. So we'll just have to wait and see how it plays out. So that's kind of where we're at on the whole PFAS and water quality issue. So far, we have not had any other issues with any of our wells, and as of the beginning of this month, water usage was down about 30% compared to last year. As you know, the Board of Selectmen, acting as water and sewer commissioners, put in a mandatory water ban. They did clarify 2 weeks ago what that ban meant, but I think the public has responded positively by cutting down their water use. In addition to the fact we've had a couple of rainy weeks and weekends recently, none of the Cape, in fact, none of Massachusetts remains in a drought condition, according to the National Drought Monitor. However, I will tell you that looking at the groundwater levels for 2 monitoring wells, one in Chatham and one in Brewster, that are managed by the United States Geological Survey, groundwater levels are still way down compared to where they would be in a non-drought situation year. So unless we get a good snowy, rainy winter with a lot of precipitation, next summer could potentially be even worse than this summer was. Because groundwater levels the last couple of years have not rebounded the way they normally do in the winter and early spring. So, not having a crystal ball what's going to happen this winter, although I think some of the forecasts are saying we will have a snowier winter, but it's going to take quite a bit to get those groundwater levels back to where they should be. So with that, happy to answer questions.
Bob, is there a trend line, a favorable trend line on the low levels of PFAS that we're finding from those wells? You said they're being tested every 2 weeks?
Yeah, we're testing every 2 weeks. I wouldn't say at this point there's a favorable trend line, because I think one of the things that makes it a little bit more difficult to predict is wells 5 and 8 have been basically offline. So the only time they're only being pumped
Okay,
when we need to take samples or when we take samples.
okay.
As opposed to, say, what was going on last spring and summer during a drought condition, you know, when they were being pumped upwards of 16 to 18 hours a day, every day, 7 days a week.
Right.
So I think, you know, while we've seen the levels of PFAS drop, it's hard to tell whether that is an actual condition or just an artifact of the fact that we're just not drawing as much water into those wells
Okay.
as we were.
Okay, thank you.
So, you know, once we get the GAC vessels online and are pumping those wells every day and sampling, because we'll sample before and after treatment, if you will, I think we'll get a better sense of exactly what may be going on.
I've got another question. I've been reading about the year-to-date rainfall,
Yep.
and right now, we are dead on with the average number of inches of rainfall year-to-date. I think it was like 30-something inches or so.
I hope not, because our average rainfall in Chatham is 44.5 inches.
Maybe it's 36 then, or whatever. I'm year-to-date, so it wouldn't be
Yeah,
a,
wouldn't be a whole year.
wouldn't be a 12-month, it'd be a
Yeah.
year-to-date. We're right on with the average.
Yep.
So I'm perplexed on why that amount of rainfall would not have brought up the groundwater table unless it's evaporating and not getting into the ground. How come there hasn't been a corresponding rebound?
For that very reason, it's probably not reaching the groundwater levels. It's probably not reaching groundwater. You have to remember that rain that we get in the summer and early fall, a lot of it is taken up by the vegetation and never reaches all the way down to the groundwater.
Okay,
That's why I say it's the winter, early spring, when the plants are still all dormant, that's when you get groundwater recharge from precipitation. If you get the rain in the summer and the fall, I mean, I've seen it many times. I was doing some planting over the weekend, and you dig down 6, 8, 10 inches, and it's bone dry. Even though we've had all this rain, the plants and all they were stressed to begin with because of the drought, going into a second year. So they're just taking all that water up before it ever reaches the groundwater. So it's not, that's why I say I generally look at January 1, 2019 as kind of the start when I look at the graphs from USGS, and I think I've shared those with some of you, and I can certainly send them out again. When you look at since January 1st, 2019, the overall trend, the trend line has been down. Even though we've seen it go up and down, the overall trend line is down. And the rain that we got this year, when I looked this morning for the Brewster, for the Chatham well, which is down on Route 137, that did show a little increase in the groundwater level. So that saw some positive increase. The well in Brewster, which is closer to the midpoint of the Mid-Cape Highway and therefore the middle of the Cape, that one showed almost no change in groundwater levels, over the since, say, January of this year. There was a slight, it went up a little bit, this fall, and then it kind of leveled off. So it didn't go up and keep going up, even though we had all that rain, because a lot of that moisture was just never reaching the groundwater.
thank you.
Do we have an estimate over the last 5 years of how much water is being drawn from the aquifer by both the municipal water systems and all the wells as the population of the Cape increases? Is part of this issue just that we're taking a lot more water than we did 5 years ago?
Yes and no. The municipal water supply wells in Chatham and other towns, we haven't been able to take a huge amount of additional water out of the aquifer because under the Water Management Act from the state, they have limited the amount of water that municipal public water supply wells can draw on or can draw out of the aquifer. In terms of the usage for private wells, I suspect that use has been significantly higher, but we don't monitor them. So if somebody has a private well on their property that they use for irrigation, we would have no way of knowing how much they're actually drawing out of the aquifer.
Well, what's happened to the population on the Cape in the last 5 to 10 years in terms? If we have twice as many people, we're probably using twice as much water.
Yeah, we don't have twice as many people in the last 10 years. Up until pre-COVID, the population was going up, but not significantly. During COVID, we know that a lot of seasonal people that normally only stayed for the summer stayed year-round, and a lot of people, we saw that. We saw that in trash disposal. We saw that in water usage. Now, whether or not that's going to continue as COVID kind of settles down, or will people go back to being seasonal homeowners? Who knows? Our usage in the public water supply wells this year is down, it's down from previous years. And we did a graph that's going to the Board of Selectmen tomorrow. And I'd be happy to share that with you guys if you haven't seen it. It's part of their packet, but I can send it around to you as part of the memo that was developed to report to them. I mean, usage this year is definitely down, and I think it's because, we had the initial voluntary water restrictions, then we went to mandatory water restrictions, and then we went to the mandatory water ban.
Now, Bob, if I decide I want to drill a private well, I have got to apply for a state permit, true?
You have to apply for a local permit.
A what?
A local permit.
A local permit,
Yeah,
it's
you
not
get
a
permit
state.
from the Board of Health. You get a permit from the Health Department.
So we have a database that we could go back and look at and do a count and find out how many newly drilled private wells there have been in the last 5 years and
Yeah.
get a sense of that trend line, because I think that clearly is,
I mean, clearly
Is
there's
it
been
up?
more private wells drilled because, as you know, when we do the sewer, we encourage people that have irrigation systems to get on a private well and get off town water because their sewer bill is based on their water use.
gotcha.
So, if 25% of your water use is an irrigation system, you don't want to be charged for that as a sewer bill because it's not being, it's not going into sewer, it's going into the ground. We passed a requirement a couple of years ago that people with irrigation systems had to put in a separate meter so that they wouldn't be charged the sewer fee for irrigation use. And we also, the town, significantly increased the rates for high water users. So if you have an irrigation system on the town system and you're using a lot of water, you are now paying a premium for that. So there has been, a fair amount of people that have been switching over to private wells.
Need a permit even if it's only an irrigation well?
Yes,
So if you're not drinking the water, it doesn't make any difference. You
yeah,
still
you
need.
still need to get a permit. Yeah. But in terms of how much they're using those wells, that we don't have any information on. If you put it in a private well for irrigation and you only use it once a season versus every day, we would never know that. We would know where the well is, how deep it is, and what the water quality was from the initial test, but we don't keep any records or require you to provide any records.
How many
of
gallons
How
per
many
year?
gallons a day
Right.
you do or do not use it.
So you could have a scenario where you have an increasing number of private wells drawing increasing volume of groundwater up for private irrigation at the same time that you're getting rainwater that's not recharging the groundwater table as much as you would expect because there's an increasing draw up of
Yeah,
of
and the other thing to
aquifer.
keep in mind too is generally private wells are relatively shallow. Our public water supply wells tend to be a lot deeper, and so sometimes there may be a confining layer in between. And so you end up with a surface water aquifer, which is where most, that's where your ponds and all are, and that's where most of your private wells are because they're shallow. And then you have a confining layer, like a layer of clay, so the water doesn't go through there a lot. But we punch through that, and that's where generally where we put the public water supply wells is into that deeper aquifer that's more protected from contamination. As opposed to the surface water or private wells, honestly, a lot of private wells, what they're doing is they're recirculating the water that goes into the septic system, which is not necessarily from a nutrient point of view, is a good thing.
Yeah.
It goes into your septic system, and then over here, you're pumping it out and putting it on your lawn with all that free fertilizer,
That's right.
So we've
So
been
this is
encouraging
why
people to do that for years.
the level of Schoolhouse Pond doesn't really tell us anything about how much water's in the aquifer. People have said, oh, the beach in Schoolhouse Pond disappeared earlier in the year, so the aquifer must be right up to the top. It's a different pool of water.
Well, the pond levels that we see are a reflection of groundwater to the extent that they're in that upper surface aquifer, that unconfined aquifer, as we call it, because there's nothing confining it on the top side.
Right.
You know, the confined aquifer, which is deeper, and confined aquifer isn't necessarily across the entire cape. You know, to give you an example, there is a clay layer under the airport that is like this. So depending on where you drill, the clay layer may be very shallow or it may be very deep. And so that affects groundwater movement as well. But generally, the ponds are a reflection of that surface unconfined aquifer. And that's why a lot of the pond levels now are low. A lot of the beaches around the ponds are much wider and whatnot than they normally, well, I shouldn't say normal, there's no such thing as normal, than they averaged in previous years. When, you know, I've seen Schoolhouse Pond to the point where the water was practically up lapping the parking lot.
Yeah, last year.
And in other years, when the beach is, you know, 50 feet, 100 feet wide, and the separation between Schoolhouse Pond and Ryder Pond right next to it, I've seen that under 2 feet of water, and I've seen it 50 feet of dry sand.
Yes.
And that's a reflection of the groundwater levels.
Bob, if you were to shoot elevations of the various ponds in Chatham, would they be at the same level?
They would, for all intents and purposes, they would all be at approximately the same level, yes.
Okay.
Yep. Because they're all kettle hole ponds, meaning.
All
that-
sandy?
All sandy, yep. And they're all groundwater fed. We don't really have any ponds that have streams coming into them. You know, like you would have off Cape, you know, in areas where you have streams coming in, and that's what keeps the ponds fed. Here, they're all a reflection of the groundwater level. You know, we have some ponds that have stream outlets, like Lover's Lake has an outlet, a herring run to Stillwater Pond, and then Stillwater Pond has an outlet to Riders Cove. But there's no stream coming into either of those.
Gotcha.
All right, and through the herring run, they actually manipulate the pond level for the herring to make sure there's enough water in that outgoing stream that the herring can get up in the springtime. And this year was a challenge because the pond started out so low.
All right,
Okay?
any more questions or comments before we move?
Just quick, who presents the articles at the town meeting, gives the information to the residents?
There aren't going to be any presentations this year at town meeting.
So for all the people that show up, so that they know the importance of all this, it has to be learned beforehand.
Yeah, there is the warrant, which is available online, as well as printed warrants are available in all the town offices. We actually taped a town meeting warrant educational program this morning, which is going to be shown on Channel 18 and the website. And that was the town manager, the finance director, and myself taped that, and that's going to be available so people can be educated. And then, you know, hopefully, because of the PFAS issue and having heard about it at the summer town meeting and then what's been in the Chronicle and all, hopefully people are educated. So there aren't going to be any.
Isn't there usually a presenter, somebody comes up and sort of?
Usually
I
at
mean,
town meeting, you know, when we do town meeting indoors, there would usually be a presenter and a series of slides about the article.
Right.
Obviously, we can't do the slides at all outdoors, so there won't be any presentations per se. You know, the explanations are all in here written. Yeah.
Right,
If
and then
there
the
are
other-
questions, they will be, you know, questions will be addressed, if you will.
Okay, and then just quick, this new EPA involvement with PFAS nationally, is that apt to have any effect on what the town is planning to do with its wells? I mean,
I don't, and you're referring to what I sent out
Yeah.
earlier, which was new information from EPA about the national strategy to deal with PFAS. I don't think it will have any immediate impact on Chatham's plans. What it may do is bring some federal money to bear, which would be helpful, obviously. You know, we've already had some discussions about the federal ARPA Act and the other infrastructure bills that are pending before Congress. There is some set-aside money in there to deal with PFAS, so if, if they ever get past Congress, hopefully we'll be ready, because we're kind of in a shovel-ready position to tap into some of that. But I think a lot of it's more long-term than just, helping us address. The one thing that I think is finally going to come out of this is we are going to have a federal standard for PFAS. As I
Good.
mentioned, up until now, there's only been a public health advisory for that. Whether or not the federal standard will be more or less than the current state standard, that we don't know. If it's lower than the current state standard of 20 parts per trillion, that could have a significant impact on Chatham.
What if it's the opposite?
If it's the opposite, the state tighter standard would still trump,
Okay.
right? Because
The state would leave its MCL where it is if the federal MCL is higher.
Unless the state was made aware of significant information why it should be higher.
Okay.
But they went through a whole process last year over a course of almost a year and a half.
Okay,
And that's where they arrived at the 20.
okay.
But, if things were to change at the federal level and there was good, solid data, the state could reconsider.
Okay. We done? Next agenda item. Let's go to item 3, a discussion regarding COVID-19 with Dr. Robert Duncanson. You're on again.
Okay, so just quickly, as you know, we had 35 cases in September of this year versus 8 cases in September of 2020. We have had 3 cases so far in October of this year. Last year, we had 8 cases in all of October 2020. So, considering we're up to the 18th of the month, we're doing pretty good. Of those 3 cases that we've had so far this year, this month, interestingly enough, 1 is in a vaccinated individual, 1 individual is not vaccinated, and 1 individual is unknown, meaning they haven't provided information yet to the contact tracers for their vaccination status. As of last Friday, when the state came out with their newest information on average positivity rates and average positivity rate and then the 14-day average daily incident rate, our positivity rate in Chatham is now down to 2.3%, which is a drop from the previous 2 weekly periods when we were above 3. So that is good news. We're continuing that downward trend. And the same thing with the average daily incident rate. We're now down to 11. We were as high as, the low 20s in this latest upsurge in cases this fall. The state, in terms of the average daily incident rate, Chatham, the average daily incident rate of 11 for Chatham. The statewide average is 19. The Barnstable County average is 16. And right now, Chatham is the 4th lowest on the Cape. So that's good news, because a couple of weeks ago, we were up towards the top on the Cape. So things are definitely trending in the right direction. For the 14-day positivity, 14-day percent positivity, we are at 2.53%. The statewide average is 1.82. And the Barnstable County is 3.65. So we are better than Barnstable County, but not quite as good as the state.
Right.
And for positivity, we are the sixth lowest on the Cape. So, things are trending in the right direction for us, and have been since roughly mid-September. So that is good news. 2 other topics that I wanted to touch on that the board asked about last week was the vaccination status of our first responders. I can tell you that I don't have specific numbers or percentages to give you, but I will tell you that the vast majority of our first responders, both police and fire, are vaccinated. So I can't give you any more specifics because we just don't have them. We're not requiring first responders to necessarily tell us whether or not they are vaccinated.
So we don't have that data. We haven't asked for it.
It has not been required by the town of those first responders. I can tell you that in the fire department, the percentage is fairly high. and maybe a little less high, but high in the police department. And then the final topic that I wanted to touch base on was where is Chatham relative to other towns and a vaccine mandate for town employees? So we surveyed all 15 towns on the Cape. And there are 2 towns that currently have a mandate. Eastham and Provincetown have mandates for all town employees, and in Eastham, if they're not vaccinated, they have to show a negative test every week. So those are the only 2 towns that have mandates for employees. All the rest have no mandates. We did not hear from 2 of the towns, and all the rest have no mandate, and a number of towns have no plans to. There was only 1 town that currently does not have a mandate, but was considering a mandate. But the vast majority of towns have no mandate and no plans to institute one for their municipal employees. And I've got a spreadsheet here that I'd be happy to hand out so you can have it, because I know I kind of,
So we have, is there 15 towns on
there's
Cape Cod?
15 towns on the Cape,
15.
including Chatham. Yep,
So 2 of 15 have a mandate in place,
have a mandate in place for
13
town employees, right,
and 13 of 15 have
Do
not.
not, right.
Do not.
yep. So those were the 2 items that you asked for information about last week. And so with that, I'm happy to answer any other questions.
So we can assume that none of the towns have vaccine requirements for their first responders either.
No, I think in the 2 towns that do have mandate, that does include their first responders.
But no towns that we are aware of have mandated that their first responders only
Only.
be
That
vaccinated.
would be correct, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
And then we had this discussion last meeting about whether the board should consider in any way further mandating vaccination for the employees in Chatham that have direct patient contact, i.e. EMTs. And there was a discussion about the proposed mandatory program at the national level, including healthcare providers.
Yes, and I did ask that question of the fire chief, and as of last Tuesday or Wednesday when I talked to him, there was no mandate at the national level for first responders like firefighters and EMTs, even though they do receive Medicare reimbursement. But he was not sure that something like that wasn't coming down the pike. That at the national level, they were concentrating first on hospitals and nursing homes
Okay.
and those kind of places. But it may be something that, as it trickles down and they kind of finish with those other groups, that it may come down to first responders, where their organizations also receive Medicare reimbursement, but there'd been nothing yet clarifying that.
That he's aware of.
Yeah, they're aware that it may be coming down, and there'd been some discussion at the Mass Fire Chiefs Association. that,
Okay.
Something like that may be coming, but nobody had any details yet.
Do we have any sense of timing if the Biden administration's mandate, which has to go through an OSHA rulemaking process and then have an implementation schedule, how long that might, I haven't read that.
No.
Has anybody on our board read anything about how many months it would be before that federal requirement would become effective? I don't.
All right?
Is there any other comments or questions that board members
I
want to
just have-
raise or
I just
offer?
have one comment.
Ron?
I couldn't wait to get out and get my shot. I couldn't wait to get my bonus shot. And I just wonder what's wrong with these people on police, fire, or are not doing it. Do they have to be told that they have to do it? And that's what I'm wondering. Do they have to be told to get it? I mean, they're not taking it affects us. I mean, you just saw Colin Powell died, and they believe it from somebody he came across. He had bad health anyways, but,
Right.
you know, it's happening. And everybody just goes like this. It's sad. It really is.
Any additional Board of Health comments?
I just want to comment. I think one big unknown, it's not the answer, but some people have had COVID, and so they have a little different outlook on their need for a vaccine. I think that factors into it, but that's not the answer you're talking about. I had another comment, and that would be something I mentioned last time. The numbers of COVID cases in Chatham are trending down. I mean, we're almost getting to 0 here in October, and the percent positivity, and I don't think there's been any clusters and businesses closed. So my question is, when would we consider rescinding the mask order for indoors in the town buildings and go back to the state guideline, which is a guideline that you wear a mask when indoors? Because the numbers of COVID are lower than when we put it in place. And I think at some point we want to pull that order back because we want to, be careful when we give an order and do it for specific reasons, usually with a triggering event. And that would be my question.
Well, when I used to take care of patients and questions like this would come up, I'd always tell them that 3 things can happen. It'll get better, it'll get worse, or it'll stay the same. And I think we're in that situation right now. We don't know where we're going, but it's getting cold. People are going indoors. In the past, that has always led to an increase in the number of cases.
Right.
But now we have vaccines, and we have some people have natural immunity, although it's not as good as vaccine immunity. And so what I would like to do is wait another month and see what happens, and see if over the next 3 weeks we start to see a cold weather indoor spike in COVID. And if we don't, by a month from now, then I think it's a pretty good sign, that this Delta variant, is now coming under pretty good control, and we're maybe going to be safe, reducing some of these restrictions. That would be my approach.
Yeah, I'd have no problem saying we can put it on as an agenda item for our next meeting. Would have the whole month of October. But I would hesitate to keep an order in place because we're worried about something that might happen down the road, Thanksgiving, New Year's holidays, winter, summer, that's sort of never ending. I think we have to come back and kind of do it when we have a problem that we're dealing with. But I wouldn't have any problem with saying, okay, we know where we are, put it on the agenda for the next meeting, and we can discuss it again, see what the numbers are.
I would concur with what Dick said. I'm happy that we're seeing a trend that's for the better. But I'd like to see a couple more months actually before we would act. But I think it's something we as a board should follow and discuss and react to on a consensus basis when we think it's time. And I think you bringing it up today is good because it keeps that in our focus. And I think that we will keep this issue as part of our standard agenda.
Yep.
And
we'll see what happens in the next several meetings.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with that thinking. But we shouldn't forget that it does, for some people, it does affect them. The select board asks that they not wear a mask during their meeting because they feel they're protected and they have very few people. I have had complaints that people can't go to the community center and be in the big gym and, pickleball has started and go up to the exercise room and exercise. And some people may not think those are important, but other people, it is important. They've been stuck inside COVID for a year and a half and they want to do those things. And so I think that's part of our consideration too. People getting back to living their life as best they can with a certain level of COVID around, which is going to be here forever. And So, but I agree with what John and Dick said in terms of how we proceed from here.
We don't know to what extent the fact that a lot of people are wearing masks has helped to bring these numbers down. And we need to remember there's still a lot of people out there who are not vaccinated, and if they get COVID, they may die. So we're not talking about the flu, we're not talking about a minor ache or pain. You know, if we decide, oh, everything's better, let's stop restrictions, let's people go and do everything they want to do, and then we have 30 people die, it would be a very bad result. And so I think I'd rather err on the side of wearing a mask for a little bit longer than have something awful happen. And, you know, we're all vaccinated, but there's a lot of people out there who aren't, and if they get COVID, they may end up on a respirator and die.
All right, any other comments? I think we've covered the agenda. We have minutes. I'd like to get a motion. First, we have minutes for October 4th. Does anyone have any edits, corrections, et cetera, for that draft set of minutes? If not, can I get a motion to approve? Thank you, Ed. Can I get a second?
Second. Noble, second.
Okay. All in favor of approving the minutes of October 4th, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none. Any other final issues anyone would like to raise before we adjourn? If not, can I have a motion to adjourn? Motion to adjourn. Thank you, Ed. Can I get a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor of adjourning, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, hearing none, meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for coming, and thank you to staff for helping us through the agenda. Thank you.